Hey guys. So thanks for taking a couple minutes out of your day to hang out with us. I am going to talk to you for a little bit today about innovation, uncertainty, and all the freaky things that go in your head when you try and do really cool new stuff, and how we deal with it, and how to maybe deal with it a little bit differently. So I'm a lefty, so I'm like crossing over like this. Would it surprise you if I told you that the way that most people and most businesses set up the way that they work is completely contrary to the way that we actually need to create and innovate? A lot of heads are like, no. Yeah, what's kind of interesting is on an individual level, whenever I ask this question, you get a lot of people saying no, because we're trying to do a lot of stuff and we can't. But there's this disconnect. And so part of my work is how to actually change this whole thing. There's this thing that happens with every creative endeavor. Any innovative project that we're trying to birth, any campaign we're trying to do, any product we're trying to launch, any business or division. And it's called the uncertainty curve. When we start something, we're at a level of sort of like maximum uncertainty. And that's a really good thing, because uncertainty is also a signpost of possibility. If we're certain about anything, that means that it's either already been done before by somebody else or by us. So the way that we innovate is we go to a place where we don't know how it's going to end, which means by default, there's an extremely high level of uncertainty in the beginning. A little bit of data, a little bit of fact, but a whole bunch of guesses, a whole bunch of assumptions, a whole bunch of leaps of faith, and probably a bit of prayer along the way too. So we start at the top of the curve, and then as we sort of like move through the process of trying to bring this thing to life, we get a little bit more certain. What happens is we get a little bit more information, and we start to replace assumption with information. And that makes us a little more comfortable. And this thing slowly moves from, we don't know what it's gonna be, there are a million different things going on, to manifested in the world. The product is what it is, the campaign is what it is, the company is launched. And here's the thing about that process, moving from the left side of the uncertainty curve to the right side. Speed matters. The speed at which you move from one side to the other makes a massive difference in the creative output from the process, in how you can innovate. So if you go too slow, what happens? Well, you're in the process, but you start banging your head against the wall because nothing is coming out of it. Worse, you just stop, you become paralyzed. Maybe your entire group or division becomes paralyzed. So if you just kind of hang out at the top left part of that uncertainty curve, nothing ever happens. And that's what happens to most people. But there's another thing that goes on, which is actually equally, if not more dangerous, which is that if you move too fast, you miss possibilities that would make this project 1,000 times better. So kind of an interesting example I'll throw in here. There's a researcher named Richard Wiseman who became really curious about whether there were any particular things that made lucky people lucky. The people that seem to just create amazing things, stumble upon amazing things, like birth crazy companies, and they just did it over and over again. Was there something about the way that they behaved or viewed the world that was consistent among all of them? So he came up with a really cool experiment. He took a group and he basically split them up. So there are two types of people. People who said, I'm very lucky, or people who said, I'm very unlucky. I'm not gonna ask anybody to raise their hand and say which group. And then he did something really cool. He gave him a newspaper, and he said, here's the deal. I want you to count up every image in this newspaper. Go. The people who considered themselves unlucky counted 42 images, and it took about 3 minutes. The people who considered themselves lucky counted 42 images, and it took about 2 seconds. How's that possible? So here's the deal. On the inside front cover of the newspaper, Wiseman had printed in 2-inch block letters above the fold, stop reading. There are 42 images in this newspaper. The people who considered themselves unlucky were so focused on only the end and nothing else that they refused to consider the possibility that something else might happen along the way that might make this better, faster, easier, cooler. And that's what tends to happen when we move too quickly through the uncertainty curve is that we put the blinders on and we just fly through and we get exactly where we want to go, but when we get there, we realize it's nowhere near what we were capable of creating. And that happens so many times. I've seen with individuals, entrepreneurs, and large organizations. So what we need to do is try and find an optimal innovation pace, which kind of lets us go in a more deliberate way from one end to the other. But there's something that has to happen there, which is that you need to be comfortable living with a pretty high level of uncertainty in the first part of the process, and that's a problem. And the problem is uncertainty for almost everybody causes insane levels of anxiety and fear of failure and fear of judgment. So, and it's kind of interesting, 1961, Daniel Ellsberg did this experiment, which is now known as the Ellsberg paradox. Anybody ever heard of it? Okay, so I'm gonna tell you what it is, and I'm gonna ask you to actually do it briefly. Imagine I have a bag in one hand, right? There are 100 marbles, 50 black and 50 white. Got it? Okay, other hand, I have a bag, 100 marbles. They're black and white, but we have no idea how many are black and how many. It could be 99 and 10, could be 40, 60, no idea. And then I tell you this, you need to wager every dollar that you have and 50% of every dollar you're gonna make for the next 10 years and make a bet. And you get to choose one of the bags and tell me whether I'm gonna pull a marble out, is it gonna be black or white? Now, here's the question for you. Which bag do you choose? 50-50, or we don't know? So here's kind of the interesting thing about this. What Ellsberg found was that almost everybody chooses, which one do you think? 50-50. Yeah, the cool thing is there is no rational basis for that choice. This is one of those questions when we were a kid on a test where it's like A, B, C, or not enough information. This is a not enough information thing. We don't have any reason. But what he discovered was that in the real world, we can't really measure risk by formulas. We get freaked out when we have to take an action or make a decision in the face of uncertainty. And fMRI studies now show us that the reason that happens is because the amygdala, the fear center in your brain, lights up and makes you want to run. It makes us anxious, makes us fearful, it makes us physically uneasy. We don't want to feel that way. So this happens to most people, and this is what it does to the innovation, the creativity process. It makes us want to go either too slowly from uncertainty and possibility to complete a project, or too quickly. Because we either step our feet in, we feel the unease, and we're like, oh no, I'm not going there. Or we step in, and then we feel the unease, and we're like, I need to go as fast as humanly possible to the other end because I don't want to keep feeling this way. Either way, the result completely kills whatever it is you're trying to work on. But it's pretty much human nature. Most of us do it. It also works on your brain so that what we know research now tells us is that high anxiety and high fear states essentially cripple creativity, ideation, productivity, and insight-based problem solving, which are the big ideas that change your world, the world, business, have a huge impact. It pretty much just sort of like, it puts a really low cap on what we're able to do. This is kind of fascinating. It creates something that I call leader idea blindness. This was a study that came out of UPenn just last year. And they were looking at corporate teams. And the big cry in the world right now, right, we heard it today, is we need more innovation. We need newer, bigger, better ideas. And a lot of complaints in the world of business are that we're not getting them. Leaders are saying we're not getting them from teams. So UPenn did a really fascinating study. They looked at all of the ideas that were submitted to a diverse set of corporate teams. They took those ideas and had them evaluated by somebody who was not the team leader. And what they found was actually the vast majority of them were fantastic ideas, but they were rejected by the team leader. The question is why? The question is why? And the answer is because that team leader, in approving an idea that had a high level of uncertainty and risk, then put themselves in the role of owning that idea, and that makes them feel really, really uneasy. That raises the anxiety and the fear and the exposure, judgment, and they don't want to go there. But here's the really freaky thing. they don't know they're doing it. They have no idea that this is why they're rejecting ideas. So one of the big things that leaders really need to do in a time where we need innovation is take a step back and look at their own processes. If you're managing a team and you find that people are regularly bringing you ideas and you're saying not good enough or too edgy, too out there, it's important to take a step back and say, really? And maybe have somebody who will not have to take ownership of that idea tell you what they think of it. So one other effect that this anxiety and fear that rides along with uncertainty has, and that's emotional contagion. That same leader, if they are in a place where they're really uncomfortable, anxious, and fearful, there's a phenomenon called emotional contagion, which means that they literally, that mood, that anxious, fearful, contracted state, if they walk into a room with their team, you will infect the members of your team in a matter of seconds with that same state. So not only will you be anxious and fearful and destroy your own creativity, but you will pass that on to an entire team. And if you're in a team and you've been in that setting, you've probably experienced the other side of that. Question is, what do we do about it? Made this with my daughter, by the way. You're gonna see another picture. So what do we do about it? How do we turn fear and doubt and uncertainty into fuel for billions? So here are some ideas, and I'm gonna split them into 3 different categories that you can hopefully take away and see how you feel about. The first one is workflow shifts. Karen and I were talking before, there's like, we both use just our own photographs from like family, so please forgive us. It's the wrong place to be doing that. So everyone's like, lighting's a little bit off. No, I would crop it differently, frankly. Workflow shifts. These are little things that you can do in the way that you actually work that can make a real difference in the psychology of the process of innovation and creativity. They can change the way that you experience trying to do really cool, epic things in your life, in work, and in your jobs. One of them is based off of, sort of one of the big words or startup, in the startup community last year was lean. Lean startup was a big thing that was buzzing around the world of entrepreneurship, which fundamentally says, take an idea, instead of developing it in isolation and putting a lot of time and money and energy into it and developing it, sort of behind the scenes and maybe doing a little qualitative research, which we all know is really accurate, right? And then hoping and praying while you launch it into the world, which is a devastating process because every day that you get closer to launch, has anyone ever launched a product in here? Or a business? Does it just get easier and funner and looser and chiller like as you get closer to launch? You're like, yeah, this is great. I can't believe how smooth everything's going, right? Yeah, it doesn't happen, right? I've been through enough launches that it's the exact opposite. It gets brutal, right? And a lot of it is because you're pouring your heart and soul into it and you don't know how people are gonna receive it. And you freak out about it. So lean reverses that process, and in doing so, it doesn't just change the process of innovation and ideation and production, it changes the psychology because it brings users into the experience a lot earlier. It focuses on learning as your core metric instead of eyeballs or revenue. And it brings feedback to you. It gives you information. It starts to replace assumptions and leaps of faith, the things that freak you out, high levels of uncertainty, with hard information earlier in the process. And that makes you feel a lot better. You can take tiny steps. You can chunk it down. The psychology of the innovation process profoundly changes. When you take something and you break it into tiny little steps and you bring potential end users in earlier and you iterate around what Eric Ries would call the minimum viable product, but we all have different names for that in our sort of productions and groups and companies. So you get validation along the way, and that really makes a huge change in the psychology of how we create. What's kind of fascinating to see is a lot of creative agencies that I've been sort of speaking with are starting to explore this approach to campaign creation and ideation, lean or agile or sort of some sort of blend of this approach because it just makes sense and because when you operate in the world of technology now, you can do it at a fraction of the cost and fraction of the expense than it ever cost before. So now it's almost difficult to justify not operating that way. What about other work shifts? pulsing and refueling is one thing that I want to share with you that's under that category too. And this is a tweak that you make to the way that you work as an individual. So I'm going to ask a question, and we'll see how many hands go up. Let's assume that you guys work an 8 to 10 hour day, right? Of that day, how many hours do you think, let's make it not about you. How many hours do you think the average person working 8 to 10 hours a day is really working? Throw out some numbers. 4, 5, 2. It's like, well, is Farmville working? If you disallow, but like, well, if you're in a business where social media is part of your job, you're like 24 hours a day. I'd never stop. So the interesting thing is that I have a friend of mine who consults with CEOs of large companies, and he asked the same question to a group of 500 high-level CEOs. The average answer from these people about how much they thought they really worked was 2.5 to 3 hours a day. Right. Oh, that doesn't mean that you're not sitting there in front of a screen or having conversations and doing something, but really getting work done. Very different. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is what we know about the way the brain functions is that after about 90 minutes, we lose it. And that's the outside edge for most people. You can be sitting there, right, and you're working, it's like an hour, you're like, okay. And then 75 minutes, and it's getting harder. And then you hit about an hour and a half, and you're still sitting there, but you're reading like the same sentence for the 5th time. There is zero chance that you're gonna resist Twitter at that point. Zero, right? Because you can't focus, your creativity plummets, your productivity plummets, your insight problem solving plummets. Our brain gets juiced after about 90 minutes. Thing is, most of us don't listen to that. We know it, we've all felt it, we feel it every day, but we don't listen because the constructs of an office say we're supposed to sit there and push through it. Really bad idea. I'm gonna offer you an alternative. It's called pulsing and refueling. And it works phenomenally, and this is the way that I work now. So if you, instead of just pushing through and working, you show up at 8 o'clock and you work until 1 o'clock, and then you have lunch at your desk, if you have lunch at all, and then you work a little bit more, and then you push through until 7 o'clock at night. You are a disaster for the second half of the day. There's just no getting around it. You can say you're working, but you and I know, right? You are not getting a whole lot really done. So do this instead, or try it. Make an experiment out of this. Try it for a week, maybe 5 days, right? Show up and work really, really intensely. This is gonna scare you a little bit, right? But turn off all of your alerts. Your cell phone, your DMs, your Facebook, your chat, your everything, and just work really intensely. Focus like crazy for 60 to 90 minutes. And then step away. Step completely away. And stepping away, by the way, doesn't mean now going on Facebook. That's actually not stepping away. Stepping away is doing things like literally get outside, go for a brisk walk. If you're a meditator, and we'll talk about that a little bit, meditate. Listen to music. Go have a conversation with somebody that's completely unrelated to anything else. Pull yourself out of the process of work. Eat. Have some good, nutritious food. The brain gets juiced. The part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, gets juiced really quickly. That helps keep you strongly focused and problem solving and creative. And we need to give it regular pauses to function properly. There's a second reason I want you to do this, besides the fact that it'll help you come up with better ideas, work fewer hours, and be happier. Does that sound like something you want to do, by the way? It's a New York crowd, I love it. I'm a New Yorker, so I get it. Do not make me raise my hand or I'll kill you. Chest bumping in the aisles later, but it's totally optional. So here's the other thing that it does, and that is that in addition to kind of crippling your ability to really do good work, to do your great work, it also juices the part of the brain that rides shotgun over the part of the brain that says, you suck, this project sucks, your company sucks, you can't do anything, your creative output is really bad, you were not made for this, you're never gonna be able to do anything in life, everybody hates you, you're never gonna get married, no kids, probably gonna have to move to another country, right? Not that anybody in this room has ever experienced those things in your mind, but the part of your brain that keeps that in check basically gets wiped out. Not completely wiped out, but it loses a lot of its ability to do that, and all the fear and the anxiety starts to be able to ride shotgun, and that double dips into disempowering your creativity and your ability to actually get stuff done. So explore these two shifts in work, right? Let's move on to the two other categories. Environmental shifts, changes in the actual environment that can make a really big impact for you. Something that I focused a lot on studying in the last couple of years is what I call creation hives. And one of the coolest examples of them these days, anyone recognize that picture, by the way? The skate park at Venice Beach in California. That to me is a really cool creation hive, because you've got a whole bunch of skaters, and they're creators. They are hardcore creators. They live and breathe hours and hours and hours a day to create amazing, amazing things. And they're working together to help each other do really cool stuff in the world. So what is a creation hive? It's a group of like-minded people who are striving, and you don't have to be working together as a team. You can also be sort of like, anybody have kids in the room? Young kids? Yeah, when kids are like up until they're like 3 years old, they can be sitting right next to each other, but they're not playing with each other. They call it parallel play, which is a lot of what happens in work these days. Yet you can be in an environment where people are around each other who are similar, shared interests, shared values, working on really cool creative projects where you can bounce ideas here and there, but you don't necessarily have to be working on the same thing, but it's the same ethic. We're building something epic. This matters to us, and I'm here to help other people. And there's a really big assumption that you have to make, which is that this is not a zero-sum game. Every person in the hive, every person in the division, in the group, in the business can rise to whatever level they're capable of rising to, and it doesn't mean that if somebody else does, I won't. Super important ethic in a hive. Find it or create it, because they're really important. But there are two other really important things that have to be present. So you need to bake experimentation into the culture of the hive. This was my hair experiment in 12th grade. In one of the most prestigious physics labs in the world, they did something called their Friday night experiments. Andre Geim, who won the Nobel Prize in physics for discovering a substance called graphene, one of the strongest substances on the planet. Every Friday night, it's a well-funded lab, they're getting paid to do really important work, but every Friday night, they would do the dopiest things on the planet. One of the things they did was they actually created a tape type of substance that was as sticky as like a salamander. So literally, it cost like $4,000 a square inch or something like that, so they couldn't produce a lot, but if they could have created gloves and things on your feet that would let you climb buildings. But they discovered this thing called graphene, which won the Nobel Prize, not during their really important, serious work during the day, but during one of the Friday night experiments where the rule was anything goes. Experimentation without any justifiable basis for doing it totally goes. And what we've seen is in a lot of organizations over the last 10 years, that when you bake experimentation into the culture, it changes things because you give people permission to fail, and to fail publicly and not feel like they're gonna have repercussions for it. That is a huge shift in culture. And that one shift can create tremendous innovation within a team, a group, an individual, or an organization. The other part of the highs, which is really powerful dynamic, is having a mechanism for transparency, which is an all-in type of transparency. So anybody know what Techstars or Y Combinator is? So in the tech scene, and this is really interesting because a lot of technology companies, so this is something that Getty would be it's an interesting thing to explore. It's easier to do in a tech company, especially because innovation has to drive any tech company. It's a seed accelerator model where you basically, every week, you're taking big risk and making experiments and trying all sorts of things that you might fail and you might do really well. But every Friday, every single person in the hive has to stand and present. It's like a coming to God moment for every person there. And it's about what I did, what I didn't do, what went right, what went wrong, and then everybody shares. This is how we think that you can do better with what you're doing. So nobody is excluded. And because everybody knows that they have a turn, it changes the dynamic, the feedback dynamic. Nobody's jumping on other people and harshing on them and criticizing them in a way that would be disrespectful because they're up next. It creates what we call a normalizing experience in psychology, where the fear, it's like changes. The fear of judgment that normally shuts so many people down pretty much evaporates, and all of a sudden people become much more willing to take risk. So another really interesting dynamic to sort of set. Now, I want to wrap up talking about one last thing, because I know we only have another minute or two here. This, to me, is actually the single most important thing that you can do as individuals to take your innovation creativity to a radically different place. It's about creating daily practices in your own personal life. To me, there are no two more powerful innovation and creativity force multipliers on the planet than meditation and exercise. 20 years ago, I would have been laughed out of an organization for saying that. There is now such a voluminous body of research that shows us that meditation, especially mindfulness-based meditation, changes the way that your brain functions. It literally is like opening up a creative vein. It creates an effect in your brain that allows you to see things that people around you simply don't see. Exercise completely changes the way that you function on a cognitive level. It allows your brain to do things it can't do when you're not exercising. If you are at a point where you feel like you're working really hard and things aren't coming to you, where you'd love to get bigger or better ideas, where you're looking at people who seem to be able to create on astonishing levels consistently over time and you can't figure out personally how to come up with stuff like that, two things I'm going to tell you. Learn to meditate and start exercising. Tremendous, tremendous research. Do it for your health, great. Do it for, vanity, great, whatever. That's why most people started. What we now know is the brain research on meditation and exercise is too strong to ignore if you want to be somebody who performs at your absolute potential on a cognitive level, on a creative level, as a leader and an innovator in the world. So those are two things that I think are really, really important to adopt just on a personal level. So the challenge I'll leave you with is to choose one. Choose one of these things. If you're somebody who runs a team here or has the ability to change something, a workflow or a shift in environment, explore that. Create discrete experiments within Getty. Propose something that says, I don't expect wholesale adoption of any ideas. What I'm asking for is, can we make a very subtle shift in the way that we work for a short window of time, agree on a metric, and see how this affects that metric. And if it works, let's continue on it or expand it. That's the way that change tends to happen in larger organizations. Right, so that's the challenge that I would throw out to you guys. So we want to learn fundamentally how to, instead of try and hunt and kill the butterflies in our stomach, we want to learn how to harness and ride them. So that's my time. I thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I hope you found it valuable.